Hi folks, HR Funk here. With one of my old work rifles, and mounted to it is the subject of today's video. This is the Vector Optics Continental 1:10 by 28 FDE rifle scope, and I first encountered this optic a few months ago at the 2025 SHOT Show at the Vector Optics display, not surprisingly. And when I was looking at it, I was kind of blown away by the brightness and clarity of the image that I was able to see while looking through the Continental scope. And this was inside a building under artificial light where typically rifle scopes are not at their best, but even so, I was really stunned by just exactly how bright and clear this image is. So the folks at Vector Optics were good enough to send me this scope for review, and we're going to get right into it. I'll tell you about the features and characteristics of this scope, and oh yeah, we are going to get out to the range and see how it performs there. So let's get right into it. We'll start this up-close look at the Vector Optics Continental scope with the way you receive it, which is in the box. And opening the box, we find a Vector Optics information sheet. An operator's manual that looks very abbreviated for an optic this sophisticated, which is becoming one of my major complaints with optics manufacturers. They put out fantastic optics, but the instructions you get with them to teach you how to use them are very limited. Here is the Vector Optics Continental scope itself. It comes with a second elevation turret cap right here. Reason being, on the one that's installed, there is a zero stop and a revolution indicator right there. If you don't want those features, you can swap the cap that's on there for the one that's in the box, and this one does not have the zero stop or the revolution indicator. This scope comes with a set of rings, and these are the appropriate 34mm size. There is a warranty card, and this scope does have a lifetime warranty from Vector Optics. There is a tool, and I'll show you how this works later. And over here we have, apparently this is a lens cleaning cloth down inside there. And it has a clip so you can hang it on your shooting bag or wherever. So I believe that's everything from inside here. Now let's get on with our look at the scope itself. I guess before I completely abandon the box, I'll show you some of the things that are printed on the outside because it tells you a lot about this particular optic. This is the Vector Optics Continental scope. It is a 1:10 by 28mm scope. It has the extra low dispersion glass, and this is shot glass that is used in this scope. The RAR reticle, which you see right here, I'll talk about this more later on. It is in FDE, it's a first focal plane optic. And somewhere on here, you can see it has the lifetime warranty from Vector Optics. It has fully multi-coated lenses, a zero stop, a 34mm tube. It is shockproof, features 93% light transmission, and it has an IP67 incursion-proof rating. As you can see, I have mounted the Continental scope on my rifle using the supplied rings. And one thing I want to mention about the mounting process, and specifically these rings, is that they are a little low for an AR style rifle. They would probably be just fine on a bolt action rifle, but on an AR, they're a little bit low. I was able to mount the scope using these rings, and I wanted to see if I could do that to see if they were going to work. And they do work, but they're not as good as an AR specific mount, and I will probably be swapping them over at some point in the future for a mount of that sort. I was able to lower the cheek piece of my rifle enough to be able to see through here, but again, it's not ideal, and as I said, I wanted to mention that here before we get any farther into the review. In order to avoid any potential confusion, I will give you the product code for this specific scope from Vector Optics. It is SCFF-68. That's Sierra Charlie Foxtrot Foxtrot 68. As I said before, it is a 1:10 by 28 millimeter rifle scope. It features a 34 millimeter main tube that is constructed of 6061 T6 aluminum, and as you can see, it is anodized in flat dark earth. There's a look at the Continental scope's 28 millimeter objective lens, and these lenses are manufactured using German shot glass, which is fully multi-coated, and the scope boasts a light transmission rate of 93%, which is precisely why when I first looked through it at the SHOT Show, it was so impressively bright in terms of the image I was seeing even indoors. The Continental scope has a fast focus eyepiece for quickly focusing the reticle in the field of view to the shooter's vision. And there's a look at the 46 millimeter ocular lens used in the Continental scope. And I should have mentioned before that the German shot glass used in these lenses is of the extra low dispersion variety, also contributing to that 93% light transmission. Between the 28 millimeter objective lens, the 34 millimeter scope, and this very large 46 millimeter ocular lens, at maximum magnification, the exit pupil coming from this lens is still 2.8 millimeters. So while that's not extremely large, it's much larger than we see sometimes with scopes. So all of that contributes to what Vector Optics calls their very generous eye box. The eye relief for this scope is rated at a constant 4 inches, so you have a very generous eye relief. This Vector Optics Continental scope is shockproof, fog-proof, and features an IP67 incursion protection rating, meaning it should be submersible, and also dust or any other foreign material essentially should not be able to get inside to cause any kind of problems. It is also rated for recoil up to the level of 338 Lapua. Now, it doesn't state what the weight of the rifle is that 338 Lapua ammunition is fired from, which would have a bearing on the amount of recoil that the scope actually has to absorb. But in any case, that's the rating that it gets from Vector Optics. The illuminated reticle of this scope is powered by a single CR2032 battery, which I am in the process of replacing because a few days ago I left this on and the battery was as dead as it can get, which also tells you that there is no auto sleep and shake awake function for this scope. And to you folks at Vector Optics, if you might be watching, that would be a helpful thing to have for people like me who occasionally forget to turn the reticle off. There are 11 brightness settings for the reticle, and there is an off position between each brightness setting. Speaking of the reticle, I'm going to try to show you some through the scope images I was able to obtain, and for once they came out pretty well. The first one you see here is with the scope set on 1 power magnification, and note the relative brightness as we look through the scope, and also you can see the reticle, which Vector Optics calls the RAR reticle. I don't know what that stands for, and I wish I did, but it has a large outer ring that you see that helps to direct your eye toward the center of the reticle, and on the very low powers, as we see here, the center portion of the reticle more or less operates like a red dot sight, although I do not have the reticle illuminated in this particular image. Here the reticle is illuminated. The scope is still set on 1 power magnification, and even though it doesn't look like it, as you see the reticle here, I can actually use this reticle at 1 power for aiming. It is not too small to be able to see. As usual, the image actually looks better to your eye when you're looking through the scope than it does to the camera when I'm trying to get an image. But I did want to show you the illuminated view of this RAR reticle, and it is bright enough, particularly that outer ring, to be able to use in daylight conditions, as you see. But as the magnification increases, and you'll see this momentarily, the center portion of the reticle is not nearly as easy to see with the illumination turned on as that large outer ring. The large outer ring, by the way, disappears just about the time you go past 6 power magnification. Here I've dialed the scope up to a magnification setting of 4 power, and you can see how much larger the reticle is at this point. I can actually see all of the elements in the reticle when I have it turned up to 4 power, even though it might not look like that in the photograph here. So at this point, I would be able to use it for ranging and wind holds and elevation holds and all those different kinds of things you can do. I think I mentioned before this is a mil-based reticle, so the measurements in the reticle are in milliradians, so that does match the turrets, making it very easy once you estimate your range through the reticle to be able to dial in whatever corrections you need to the turrets if you're going to be using the turrets for your corrections, and I'll get into that a little bit more later on. Here I've turned the magnification up to 8 power, and as you can see, that large outer ring has disappeared at this point. And also, if you look closely, you can start to see some of the Christmas tree elements in the reticle down below the center axis. And as I said before, I can see this clearly when looking through the scope, but the camera is not picking it up nearly as well. Another thing I want to point out in this image is the fact that the illumination is still turned on at the full brightness setting, but against that bright colored target, you really can't see any red illumination at all on the target for any sort of contrast. And that was one of the things that I was mentioning before with regard to the brightness settings. You can see it in daylight. When I was actually looking through the scope, I could see it, but unless you're looking at a dark background, it's not very easy to see. So this image helps to illustrate why it is that I don't typically use illumination under bright sunny conditions. Here I would actually have more contrast with the illumination turned off with just the black etched reticle rather than having the illumination turned on. Even so, it is still bright enough at the lowest settings down around 1 power to be able to use more or less the way you would use a red dot sight, but still a couple of additional higher brightness settings would be welcome. Here I have the scope turned up to the maximum magnification setting of 10 power, and unfortunately this image was slightly out of focus. That was an issue with my camera, not with the scope itself, but you can still get an idea that the image itself is very bright. So as opposed to what we see sometimes at maximum magnification, this image does not get darker. And as I said, the actual quality of this image was still quite good to my eye, just my camera did not pick it up in this particular setting. The illumination is still set on maximum brightness in this image, but as you can see, it's providing little to no contrast. And as you'll see momentarily, it's going to work better against a dark background, but against this light colored background, not so much. And here the scope is still set on the maximum magnification setting of 10 power, and the reticle is still at the highest brightness setting. And I moved the scope slightly so you can see it contrast against the green vegetation on the range berm, and you can see that it is easier to see. So the color of the item that you are looking at through the scope has a definite bearing on how well you can see that illuminated reticle. By the way, I didn't mention it before, but all of these images were taken at a distance of 100 yards. This horrible image is something I was able to get in the shop, and this is not representative of the quality of the image when you look through this scope, but I just wanted to show you that all of the elements in the reticle do illuminate, so under adverse lighting conditions, the shooter would be able to perform all of the operations that this reticle is capable of. And here is an image of the reticle itself. This is probably the best image that I was able to get in the shop. As I said before, it is a mill-based Christmas tree style reticle, and at the very top above the center axis you can see that there is a ranging scale on this particular reticle, and this is one of the things that is not explained in the operator's manual for this scope. So I'm basically estimating that you're bracketing 36 inches from the bottom line of the ranging reticle to whichever line it equates to up above to determine the distance from the shooter's position to the target. I believe 36 inches is the correct measurement, but I'm not absolutely certain. As I said, this is a first focal plane scope, so as you can see, the reticle gets larger as the magnification level is increased, and it gets smaller as the magnification level is decreased. So the sum of all that is the elements in the reticle are always true regardless of the magnification setting. Another thing I wanted to demonstrate here, and I hope this comes through in the video, the Continental scope, like many others, is advertised as having a true 1 power. If you look at the targets on the wall and then look at the image through the scope, you can see that there is some magnification, even though the scope at this point is on the 1 power magnification setting. Vector Optics is not the only manufacturer that advertises an optic as a true 1 power, meaning no magnification. only to find that there is some magnification imparted to the image when it's viewed on that 1 power setting. However, I don't think this had any bearing on the performance of this optic when I was using it for close defensive drills, but I did want to note it in this review. On we go to the windage and elevation adjustment turrets. And these turrets are very well designed. First off, they are locking turrets. When they are in the down position as they are right now, they will not turn. So you don't have to worry about the scope being bumped or rubbing against anything. They will not turn. You have to pull them up to unlock them, then they will turn. And I don't know if you can hear that or not. I'll move the microphone in a little closer. But these are very tactile and very audible clicks. They seem to be very precise as well. And as I said, once you make your correction, you can lock them back in place. These are resettable to 0, and that's the purpose of this tool that I showed you earlier that I took out of the box. You can use this to unscrew the large screw in both the elevation or windage turret. Once you have your 0 established, then you can remove the turret cap, turn it back so the 0 mark lines up with the indicator mark on the scope body itself, put it back in place, and tighten down the big screw. Now, one thing about this tool, I did find this to be a little bit flimsy when I was out on the range, so probably a coin would be a little bit better, but this worked. It did its job. The turrets are graduated in 1/10 mil increments, and you can see on the elevation turret that one complete revolution of the turret is equal to 10 mils, and that's the same for both elevation and windage. On the elevation turret exclusively, there is a second row of numerals to indicate the number of mils you have elevated on a second revolution, and then there is a third row of numerals up here for a third revolution. Along with that is the revolution indicator that I mentioned earlier in the video. After one complete revolution, you can see that this revolution indicator is projecting up above the top of the turret cap, and you can see this red portion. So that tells you you are now starting the second revolution of the turret. After another complete revolution, you can now see this silver portion above the top of the turret cap to tell you that you are now starting on the third revolution. So that helps you to know exactly where you are in dialing. And when you turn back, it gives you a quick reference to know when you are back to your initial 0 setting. By the way, there is a 0 stop that can be set for this turret, but as I said earlier in the video, if you don't want the 0 stop or you don't want the revolution counter, you can swap out the other turret cap, and it does not have either of those two features. The windage turret is marked for right or left corrections, and they travel for 5 mils in either direction before they start to overlap. After that, you're going to be looking at the L when you're dialing for the R and one thing and another. I find that to be kind of confusing, but a lot of scope manufacturers are using that. And with this optic, I think most of the people who use this are not going to be dialing windage and elevation. Rather, they're going to be using holds with the reticle. So you'll see when we get out to the range, I'm going to be doing some shooting using holds at different distances, because I think that's more in line with how this is going to be used rather than dialing in all the corrections for elevation or windage as necessary. At this point, I have been to the range several times with my rifle and this Vector Optics Continental scope. And the first time out was a simple zeroing process, which was very straightforward. I had no problems with zeroing the optic other than the height of these rings that I mentioned earlier, which was a little bit of a nuisance, but it was certainly not insurmountable. The next time out, I fired a box test. If you've not seen this before, each shot that you're about to see is fired with me aiming at the center bullseye of the target. But I make windage and elevation corrections between each one of those shots, and if the corrections are true, I should end up with a shot hole in the other bullseyes that are around the periphery of the target, and the final shot I bring the turrets back to 0, and that last shot should be back in the center bullseye. Here's how that went. And here's the target I was using in that box test you just saw. My first shot was right here. This was a cold bore shot. So clearly that Continental scope was maintaining 0 after the last time I had gone to the range and established that 0. After this shot, I came up 2.6 mils and left 1.6 mils. And while maintaining my point of aim right here, I fired this shot. Then I came down 5.3 mils and fired this shot. Then right 3.2 mils, fired this shot. Up 5.3 mils and fired this one. Then I came left 1.6 mils and down 2.6 mils, which zeroed out my turrets again, and fired this shot. The return to 0 here is pretty impressive. These two shots are within a half minute of angle of each other. I did measure this. My other shots going around the target here are not bad. They're not dead center in the middle of these bullseyes, but as I said before, I really don't expect that a lot of people using this particular scope are going to be dialing a lot of their corrections. I think they're going to be using a hold most of the time with that reticle. So with that in mind, I'm not seeing anything here that's really causing me a great deal of concern. And as I said, the return to 0 was pretty impressive. So after that, a few more days went by, and let's go out to the range and I'll tell you about what I did this time. For the next test of this Vector Optics Continental scope, what I'm going to be doing is testing to see if there's any deviation in the point of impact for my bullets as I work my way through the magnification range of this optic. The way this works is I start out on the lowest magnification setting of 1 power, and I will fire a shot. Then I'll dial the magnification up to 4 power and fire another shot. Then I'll go up to 7 power and fire another shot. And finally, I'll go to the maximum magnification of 10 power and fire the final shot. We'll be able to look at the target and see if there's any variance whatsoever that we can attribute to the scope as I work my way through that magnification, or if all those shots stay rock solid. I forgot to mention a moment ago, folks, but I am set up at a distance of 100 yards. And typically, when I perform this test, I fire headshots, but since I'm starting out on 1 power magnification, I better turn this back to 1 power while I'm thinking about it. I'm going to fire these for the center chest on this target, and we'll see if those bullets maintain a consistent point of impact. There's 2 shots downrange. And finally, all the way up to 10 power. I'll have to play the video back to see exactly what order these shots arrived in, but everything stayed in this center chest, and I don't see anything there that would indicate to me there's any deviation as I work my way through the range of magnification settings on that scope. As long as I'm still set up on 10 power, let's try a single INZ shot from this distance of 100 yards. I'd say our bad guy is pretty much done. Because of the type of scope this Vector Optics Continental is, it should work well for close-range defensive applications just like long-range precision work. But something I want to mention before we get into this is the fact that that is not what this rifle was intended to do. This was intended for long-range precision work. I think it will work well enough to test the scope for this type of use, but it's not ideal. In any case, what I'm going to do in just a moment is start to shoot some close-range defensive type drills. I'm going to start out at a distance of 5 yards and shoot controlled pairs from that distance. Then I'll move back to 7 yards and shoot some failure drills. I'll go back a little bit farther and shoot from behind cover, and I'll probably shoot some 50-yard prone drills or something like that before it's all said and done. At the end, we'll take a look at the target and see how the optic and the shooter did. This is going to be an arm workout, folks. No problem there. Let's go back a little farther and try some failure drills. By the way, folks, when I shot those controlled pairs, the scope was on 1 power and there was no illumination, and I would have turned the illumination on, but I just didn't think of it. It's still on 1 power for the failure drills, but now I have the illumination turned on. It's on setting 11, which is bright enough to be able to see out here on this bright sunny day. It's not overly bright, but I can see it. Let's see what happens with the failure drills. They all look pretty good to me. By the way, I don't know how much this rifle weighs, but you see how long it takes me to bring it up. As I said, this was not meant for this type of use. I'm now back to 25 yards. I'm going to try a few shots from behind cover, and we'll see how the scope works in this application. I have bumped it up at this point to 4 power. Now we'll come over top. And come down on the left-hand side. And I'm out of ammo. That's what happens when you miscount. Anyway, let's go down range and take a look. And all those shots stayed pretty well centered in the chest, and I'm glad they did because I was unsteady as I could be from that position. Now let's go back to 50 yards and try something else. I'm now back to a distance of 50 yards, and this is going to be a prone drill. What I'm going to do is start out standing, then I'm going to drop into a prone position, and as quickly as I can, I'm going to acquire my target and then squeeze off a shot from this distance. Normally, I would start with my rifle at port arms standing, but I decided since I'm more concerned about how quickly the scope will allow me to acquire my target than I am trying to see how quickly I can assume a shooting position, I'm going to leave the rifle on the ground. That way all I have to do is get in behind that scope, get my sight picture, and then squeeze off the shot. So let's see what happens. By the way, folks, I can't remember if I said it before or not, but the scope is now set on 6 power and the illumination is on. There's one downrange. Getting my workout today. There's 2 downrange. And there's 3. Let's go take a look at the target. And in case you can't see those shots, they are here, here, and here. These 2 are within ½ an inch center to center. This one opens the group up to probably about 2 inches, give or take. So no problem whatsoever with target acquisition that is attributable to the scope. The only thing I noticed, and I've been noticing this all day, is the rings that came with that scope would probably be fine on a bolt action rifle, but on an AR style they are a little too low, so it takes me a little extra instant to get my head cranked down in there to be able to get my sight picture. But that's really just a mount issue. It's nothing to do with the scope itself. That shot glass is extremely clear. My sight picture is very good. and the illumination that I'm using is bright enough to be able to see it under these conditions. As I said, it's not extremely bright, but it is usable, and so far I have not had any problem with any of these defensive drills at all. I'm back to 200 yards with my rifle and the Vector Optics Continental scope. And I think what I'm going to do from here, since we already established the tracking and repeatability of this optic through the box test that I did earlier in the video, I think what I'm going to do, instead of dialing on a correction for 200 yards, is I'm going to go with a hold from here, which should be just about 1/2 mil. And let's see what happens. I've got the rifle, or the scope rather, on 4 power from back here. And I didn't say it before, but I was aiming for center chest, and there's no way that I can see where that bullet hit from here, even on 10 power. I'll take that from 200 yards using a hold on 4 power. Not bad at all. Now let's go back to 300 yards and see what happens. All right, folks, I'm now back to 300 yards, and things went so well with a hold at 200 yards. I'm going to try a hold again at 300 yards. I do have this optic dialed all the way up to 10 power. And I'm going to hold over about 1.5 mils. Might have pulled that one just a touch to the left. It looked like it through the scope, but I'm going to have to go down range and we'll see where that hit. And no, I didn't pull it to the left far enough to take it out of the center chest square. Those two shots are within probably 1.5 inches of each other, center to center. So I am feeling very good with the performance of that Vector Optics scope. Just like that, we are back where it all began, in the shop, for some final thoughts on this Vector Optics Continental scope. And I'm going to handle my final thoughts a little bit differently today than I typically do at the end of an optics review, precisely because of the MSRP of this particular optic. If you go to the Vector Optics website, you can see what the MSRP is. That's the easiest way to do it, so I don't have to worry about running afoul of YouTube by giving a price. But suffice to say, this is one of the most expensive scopes I have reviewed here on the channel, and as the price of the optic increases, so too do my expectations for that optic. So some of the things I talk about might seem a little bit nitpicky, and if I was talking about a less expensive scope, I probably would not even mention some of these things, but for something in this price range, these are things that definitely caught my attention and I think need to be corrected. I'm going to start out with my more critical comments, and then I'll end with my positive comments about this optic, so at least we finish up on a high note. The first thing that I'll mention has really nothing to do with the scope itself, but rather the operator's manual that comes along with this scope. It needs to be completely revised, rewritten, and made much, much more comprehensive for this scope. When we look at this, I've got it still down here on the bench. There is just not that much information contained in here. It needs information about all of the features and functions and adjustments for this optic. There needs to be a detailed diagram of the reticle with all the subtension values, including that ranging scale at the top of the reticle. All of that needs to be explained so that a new shooter who's not used a scope like this before can read the manual and know how to operate the thing. The next thing I'll mention, I also said during the video, you do not get a true 1 power, i.e. no magnification level with this optic. Even on the 1 power setting, you do still get some magnification. Now, I don't think that hindered me while I was shooting the defensive drills. I was able to shoot those without any problem whatsoever. But if you're a stickler for true absolute 1 power, that is not what you get in this optic. The auto shutoff feature and shake awake needs to be added to this scope. Now I realize it's my fault that I left this on and the battery died, but for a scope in this price range, there really should be an auto shutoff to guard against the shooter neglecting to do that. And this doesn't have it. There's no shake awake, there's no auto shut off, and as I said, it needs to be there. The reticle needs to be brighter. Now, when I was out shooting my way through those defensive drills, it was a bright sunny day and I was able to use the reticle, albeit on the maximum brightness setting. but the target itself was in a little bit of a shadow there. Had the target been exposed to direct sunlight, I don't know if I'd have been able to see the reticle as well or not. So for use on 1 power or at the very low magnifications, more or less as you would use a red dot optic, that reticle needs to be brighter, especially the very center portion of it. The rings, as I mentioned, are for something other than an AR. Now this is difficult because I realize a manufacturer cannot guess what rings an individual shooter is going to need who purchases their optic, but maybe what they should do is offer different packages with different rings so the shooter can look at the specific package and determine which one is going to be appropriate for the rifle to which they're going to mount the scope, and then select that option rather than putting a set of rings in that are maybe going to work, maybe not. Now these, truth be told, did work. I was able to use the scope with these rings, but as I mentioned, they're not ideal for an AR, and having multiple options with different packages would be a much better way to go, once again, for a scope in this price range. Lastly, I think this scope should have a throw lever. Now, I think there might be one you can get from Vector Optics to attach to this. I'm not sure. There might also be some aftermarket options that will fit this. But once again, for as much as you're paying for this scope, I think a throw lever should be included, and I think you should be able to either attach it or detach it as preferred by the individual shooter. On to the positive side of the ledger. I've said in the past that I think a 1 to 10 power rifle scope is something of an overreach. For the ones that I have tested in the past with this type of a magnification range, it seems like at either end of the spectrum, you don't really get the performance you want to get. Even so, I think this is the best rifle scope in that magnification range that I have personally tested. At the low end, the reticle is not so small that it's invisible basically. With this one, you can still use it for aiming. Now, I don't know who takes a shot at any kind of distance with the scope set on 1 power. Maybe they want to have the widest field of view or whatever, but if they choose to do so, the reticle in this scope is not so small that it cannot be used for aiming. You actually can fire an aimed shot on 1 power. Conversely, if you dial it all the way up to 10 power, the reticle does not get so big that it starts to lose precision. So I think the reticle design is very good, and I like that beyond just the aiming ability at either end of the magnification range, I also like the reticle itself. I like that large outer ring when you're using it at the low powers, especially with the illumination turned on, because it does help to direct your eye to that center portion of the reticle if you're using the scope like a red dot optic. And historically, I've not been a fan of the Christmas tree style reticles. Maybe I'm just getting more used to them, I don't know, but the one in this scope doesn't bother me. I really like the reticle that they have designed in this scope. I think it works great for precise shooting. It works great for holdovers. You've got all of those aiming points if you need to fire a follow-up shot or estimate distance or whatever you're doing. So I think the reticle design in this is very, very good. Moreover, the brightness and image clarity of this optic is tremendous. I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that's the first thing that caught my attention, using it indoors under artificial lighting. And I hope you can see here, even though I'm getting into the high magnification range in this image, so the target itself washes out, but the brightness level and the clarity of the image with that shot glass and the multi-coatings is just absolutely fabulous. The overall feature set with the revolution indicator, the multiple revolution markings on the elevation turret, the locking turrets, I like all of that. The fast focus eyepiece, the illumination control, all of this is very easy to use. It works very, very well. I think the overall precision of this scope is very good. The IP67 incursion protection rating is very good. The shockproof, fogproof, all of that, again, very, very, very good. The fact that it comes with rings is a bonus. That I would like to see different ring packages is my own personal preference, but you don't have to purchase an additional set of rings before you can mount your scope. And since this is a 34mm tube, you get the 34mm rings, which might not be available in every shop out there that you go to. So that's nice as well. The fact that this scope can be dialed all the way from 1 power up to 10 power and it doesn't have a parallax adjustment was something that concerned me, but I didn't really notice any parallax, any problem with the image through the scope or anything else. So wherever the parallax is set in this scope from the factory seems to work pretty well, at least for my eyes. And lastly, this scope has a lifetime warranty from Vector Optics, so if there ever is a problem with it, it can be repaired or replaced without any further expense to the purchaser. So all of those are positive comments, and those overall are my final thoughts on this Vector Optics Continental scope. And that's going to do it for this video, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward them to me. Remember, stop by my website, check out all the things going on there, and until next time, good shooting. Bye-bye.